myth of savings. I'm going to look at mapping out the path to investing, and then also look at where do you start once you are bought in. And then for those of you guys who have kids, if you guys have kids, raise your hand. Have kids? All right. Those of you guys who have kids who are trying to figure out, I don't know if you're planning on paying for college or if they're on their own, but I'm going to help you guys to understand what are some of the vehicles that you do have to putting together a college fund for them. And then the last thing we're going to do, hopefully we get to our case studies. So what I'm going to do is going to have different scenarios, and I want us to have a conversation as a group. Well, hopefully we get more people, and then you guys can break off into groups, and to really talk about the different cases and look at what you would recommend for each person in that scenario. Make sense? Yes, ma'am. All right, fantastic. All right, let's go on. So investing is a biblical principle. So the Bible actually talks about investing in Matthew. And in there was a story about a guy and what he was a master. He was going out on a journey. And when he went out on a journey, he called 3 of his servants and he gave them different bags of golds. And the Bible says that he gave it each or according to his own ability. So to one he gave 5, to another he gave 2, and then to another he gave 1. So the Bible or the parable goes that the guy who got 5 bags of gold, he went out and in the Bible will talk about how he put the 5 bags of gold to work for him. And he was able to get 5 more bags of gold. The guy who got 2 bags of gold was able to get 2 more bags of gold. But the guy who had 1 bag of gold took the gold and he went and he buried it. And you'll see when the master comes back, they were like, okay, give me an account of everything that you've done with the money. And the guy that had 5 bags of gold came back and he was like, hey, look, I got 5 more bags of gold. And he was like, good job. And then the second guy was like, hey, look, I had 2 bags of gold and I was able to basically double it. So he was like, good job. And then the guy who had 1 bag of gold took it and he was like, master, I know you were a very, very hard man. And so what I did was I took your bag of gold and I buried it. And the master was very, very upset because he said, well, if you knew I was a hard man, the least you could have done is just gone and go put it in a savings account where I could have gotten some interest on it. So in there, it really opened my eyes to the fact that we as believers need to develop a lifestyle of investing and not see money as just one thing that I trade for something else. So I wanted to back this up because many times you'll be like, oh, is this biblical, blah, blah, blah. Yes, investing is biblical. The other thing I was going to say is that as we go through this class, if there's anything that I say that you guys are not clear about, please interrupt me. I know right now you guys are all quiet, but hopefully we break out of the quietness pretty soon. All right. So let's talk a little bit about savings, okay? My parents happen to be here, and one of the things that I wanted to do is to debunk the myth of savings, right? So there's this great quote, and in it talks about how many people how many millionaires do you know who basically got to where they are because of savings? And it says, I rest my case. They all got to where they are because of investing. In fact, I don't know if you guys saw the headlines on Thursday afternoon. There was a headline that basically showed that Jeff Bezos had added $11 billion to his net worth in minutes. Why? They had their earnings call. And in their earnings call, they did a great job. So their stock shot up by between 11 and 13%, just literally in minutes. And because their stock shot up by that much, his net worth shot up by 10 or $11 billion, literally in minutes. And what many people don't realize is that a lot of people who are wealthy are not wealthy because they do a great job saving. They can save, they'll have savings, and we'll talk a little bit about the place of savings when it comes to thinking about finances. But you have to realize that a lot of them are wealthy because of how they invest. Jeff Bezos is wealthy because he is a primary shareholder of Amazon. That's his company. It's his baby. He basically founded the organization. If you look at a lot of executives, Executives are actually paid out in a couple of different ways. They have their salary, which everybody knows, a majority of them might make about $500,000. And for us, it's like, whoa, that's a lot of money. And they might get a bonus, maybe another $500,000 in bonus. So there you are, you're at $1 million. They're millionaires, right? But that's not where the majority of their money comes from. It comes from restricted stock units or stock awards, and it also comes from options. So their stock awards might be in the $20 million range. So that's how they are incentivized to make sure that they keep the company growing, okay? So I want you guys to think about savings, not necessarily as I need to save my money, because we all were taught this when we were younger. My parents are here. My mom will tell me, girl, you're spending too much money. You need to save your money, all of this. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because there is a place for savings. But at the same time, we also need to understand, when is it the right time to save? When is it the right time to invest your money? So what I want to do is talk a little bit about wealth. And here's where the interactive part is going to come in. How much would you guys say you need to consider yourself wealthy?
I would say I'm stealing this from Chris Rock, because I like Chris Rock, but he said a joke that basically was like, there's a difference between rich and wealthy. Mm-hmm. Rich you can squander with a bad weekend in Vegas and a drug problem, but wealth, you can't squander that. It gets passed on from generation to generation to generation.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else? Yes.
Having some sort of assets that can just, from interest, replace my salary, so I don't have to work.
That's good. Okay. Each person has their own definition of what we believe wealth is, right? But the one thing that I want you guys to take away is that building wealth takes knowledge, it takes discipline, and it takes time. I want you guys to understand it's going to take time. It's not going to be one of those things where by next week, if you invest in X, Y, and Z, you're going to become a millionaire. If you do, there are people who do that, and sometimes a lot of people hear these stories and they immediately jump and be like, okay, let me go jump on that stock and let me go do what they did, right? The assets that can actually make you millionaires in 2-3 years are very, very risky assets. And you need to understand your risk profile as an investor. So is that the path, or is that the way that I would say that you should take to becoming wealthy? The answer is no, because there's a sure guaranteed way that you can take that beats I'm going to go and try and find the next stock that's going to pop up and give me 1,000% return on my investment. Okay? So here's where we begin to reframe and to reshape how you think about money. I want you guys to now start to think about yourselves as an incorporation. And the goal for you guys is to think, with every single dollar I get, what do I need to do with this money so that it makes the most impact to my business, okay? And when I say that it makes the most impact to my business, you're not just working to get money to go spend money, right? When you get money, or whether it's from your job, whether it's from, gifts, awards, etc., whenever you get the funds, the question then becomes, what do you do with the money? And here's where I want to start reframing a little bit of, sorry. You're touching something.
Yes, I will be right with you.
My dad must have stuff. But the next slide is we're going to talk a little bit about interest. And okay, before we do that, so what can you do with money? There are a couple of different things which you can do, which are very elementary. So you can pay, and this is typically the order in which we tend to think about it. You can pay your debt or expenses. So people have mortgages, if you have rent, you've got bills, you can do that. You can also spend money. We're really great spenders. You can give, you can save, But this is what we this is the loop in which we tend to go through. And when you think about investing, there's fear, there's uncertainty, there is, I don't know what, or I should be investing in. And this is how the loop now becomes a little bit broken. So what I wanted to do is to introduce to you guys the idea of compounding. Have you guys heard about compounding? Everybody understand how compounding works? A little bit? Okay. So let me show you how a little bit about, or talk a little bit about compounding, right? The earlier that you get started investing, or the earlier you get started putting money into an appreciating asset, the better it is going to be for you in the long term. So the two lines that you see here are basically modeling lines in which I modeled a starting balance of $5,000. You have two different scenarios. One of them is actually in an investment account that generates 10% of interest year over year. The other one is in a savings account. Let's say you got a good online savings account that generates 2% interest year over year. So after 20 years, what you'll see is that the savings account only got you to about $7,400. The investment account got you to over $30,000. And this is not adding any kind of money or anything like that. So how does this actually work? So what you'll see, Dad, did you touch something again? Oh, there you go. Okay, so what you'll see is that how compounding works is actually very easy, but it's very mathematical, and it's a logarithmic effect on finances. So beginning year balance $5,000, right? Interest rate 10%. So 10% of 5,000 is 500, right? So end of year balance is 5,500. Beginning of year two balance, 5,500. 10% of that is $550, right? End of year balance is now 6,050. You take this and you go over the years, and that's how you get to over $30,000. I only put it out to 10 years here because it would be too long and you guys wouldn't be able to see it. So what I highlighted here are two years. So by year 5, you'll surpass the savings balance over a 20-year period, okay? Remember, the savings year balance was about $7,000. So by year 5, you would have surpassed that in your investment account. But the other one, which I wanted to talk to you guys is about the rule of 72. Have you guys ever heard of the rule of 72? So the rule of 72 states that you take 72, you divide it by the interest that you are getting on your money, and that is basically how long it's going to take you to double your money, okay? So here we had $5,000, right? So the rule of 72 says 72 divided by 10 means it's going to take 7.2 years for me to go from $5,000 to $10,000. Does that make sense? You guys all follow that? Yeah. So the rule of 72 says that you take 72, you divide it by your effective interest rate, right? That interest, or the resulting value, is the amount of time it's going to take for you to double your initial investment. Make sense? So here you see that it's going to take about, if we have 10%, so 72 divided by 10 is going to take us 7.2 years. So you see that in year 8, right, we get to over double. So it's $10,717. Does that make sense? You guys all following me there? All right, fantastic. So that is the rule. That's the rule of 72. So what I want to do is really bust this myth. You're gonna have to get me a little closer to that. There you go. Okay. So interest. You guys have got to start thinking about how interest is how hard your money is working for or against you. Always have that mindset. If, in fact, in the different, that we have, in the different scenarios, in case studies, which we're going to study, we're going to look at it, and you have one of the key things that I'll tell you to pay attention to is how much interest is in the scenario, whether the interest is working for a person or the interest is working against a person. Interest working against you would be things like revolving credit, your credit card. I borrow $100. I'm getting charged 22%. So that means that for me to borrow that $100, it's going to cost me over, what is the easy math on that? 22% of around $22, right? To be able to borrow that $100. So you need to always be cognizant of how much interest you have in scenarios or the different scenarios. And if there's anything you take from this class, please really understand that interest is how hard money is working for or against you, okay? All right, so let's really kind of bust this myth wide open of savings versus investing, right? So here we have the same $5,000 balance, but let's say that we're great savers. Like we are diligent, and every single month we put away $1,000. So at 2% return after 20 years, you're going to have $302,000. That's great. I mean, it's something, right? So you're diligent. You start with $5,000. At the end of 20 years, you have $302,000 to show for it. But if you were to invest with the same 10% interest rate, you're going to get all the way to $802,000. That's almost $500,000 more. Investing versus saving, okay? You guys are following me so far? No questions? Okay, good.
Pause on this slide for just a moment.
Yeah. And I can send you guys these slides if you're interested in getting some of them. So what I wanted to show you guys by doing this is how important it is to invest and how important it is to invest early. You got to get started where you are, and the science of compounding works in your favor versus getting started later. So I know one of the things that you guys look at this and you'll say, okay, savings is 2%, investing is 10%, but it's not guaranteed, right? It's like, what are you going to invest in that's going to get me 10% return year over year? I don't know. You guys, anyone have that question, right? Yes, no, yes, okay. Because you guys, I'm like, you guys got to get like, give me feedback.
Isn't the S&P index like the 6% or 5%?
That's a great question, because I have that right here.
Oh, there we go.
So, a lot of people think investing is risky and returns aren't guaranteed. So what I did was that I took the average returns of an S&P 500 for the past 20 years. So this is since 2000, between 2000 and 2020, right? What you'll see is that the market will, you can't figure out when the market is going to trend up or trend down, right? Exactly. You always got to go for the long game. If you're invested for the long term, you will do well, okay? So this was the returns for the past 20 years, right? In fact, last year was one of the best years that they had. They finished at 31.49%. Absorb that. Any questions?
Yeah, my 401k was wild last year.
It was good, right?
I love it.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the average returns of the S&P 500 for the past 20 years. So then the questions that was just 20 years. What does it look like over the duration since the market has ever existed? So what I did here was just to show you the returns of the S&P 500 since its inception, right? Since the beginning in 1920, in the 20s, right? And what you can see is that long-term, and this is inflation adjusted, so this is like real dollars. If I actually showed you what it was, it would basically spike up, but we adjusted it for basically showing you that $1 back there might be the equivalent of maybe $100 today. Does that make sense? So it's inflation adjusted. And what you can see, the gray bars are where there were actually recessions, okay? So what you tend to hear out whenever a lot of people are talking or commentary about the market is that you have a recession about every 10 years. So this is the longest period that we've actually gone since the 2008 market crash without a recession, okay? And a lot of people, that is what's making a lot of people really antsy, like, okay, we haven't seen a recession. You typically see a recession every 10 years. But what I wanted you guys to really take out of this graph is that you will never be able to figure out when the market is going to crash. You can't, I mean, in 2018, you saw a dip in the market, right? According to this graph. So in 2018, the market return was actually minus 6%. So when you invest for the long term, it's good for you, or you make out. If you invest for the short term, that's when you're gonna have a lot of uncertainty. And the other key thing when you start to invest is that you need to make sure that you're not investing with funds that you need in the short term. And we'll talk a little bit about that because that's where savings comes into play. So let's talk a little bit about investing versus gambling. So investing versus gambling. So investing involves risk, right? And this is the whole idea of, well, when you're investing, you don't know what you're investing in. It's very risky. It's like gambling, blah, 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 blah. Investing involves risk, but you control the risk. Whereas whenever you're in gambling, it involves risk, but guess what? The way that gambling is set out, it's set out so that the house always wins. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Vegas and you've tried to gamble, but you're not, unless you're a professional gambler, you're not going to make out well, in those scenarios. The other thing with investing is that you're actually a partial owner. And we'll talk a little bit about what this means in not the next class, but in the class on the 22nd. The other thing that you'll see is that with investing, you get a part of the profits of ownership via dividends and also with the increase in stock price. And then you also have a proven track record about the market over time. So these are just some of the benefits that you have with investing. The other thing is that with investing, you can mitigate your losses. So if you see a stock or you're invested somewhere and let's say the stock is down 50% and you're like, you know what, I'm going to cut my losses, you can just pull your money out. Whereas with gambling, you can't tell them, stop, don't roll that dice, I just want to pull my money out right now, right? You're in it, it's basically an all or nothing kind of scenario. And then it allows you to analyze data regarding a company, a fund, et cetera. So you can actually do a lot of due diligence about an asset before you start or before you invest in it, okay? So one of the things that we're now going to shift and start talking about is the idea of active versus passive income. And I have a very simple definition of how I define active versus passive. If you read if you read books and all, they'll talk about passive income, portfolio income. They'll talk about passive portfolio and active. But I just break them up, active, passive. And my definition is this: if I can make money when I'm sleeping, it's passive. Means that I don't have to get up and go do something to get the funds or to get the money, then that income stream is passive. Active income stream, how many of you guys in here have a job you go to every single day? That's active, all right? Another way you can think about passive income stream, if you write a book, right? And the royalties you start getting in on that book. You've done the work one time, right? And now the money is basically passive. If you have a patent, the money that you're getting with regards to royalties is a passive income stream. So this is why sometimes you will hear a lot of people talk about how you need to figure out how to have multiple streams of income, but it's not necessarily multiple streams of active income because you will wear yourself out. It's like holding down 3 jobs. You don't need to have 3 jobs. What you need to do is you need to figure out how to make money while you sleep, okay? And Warren Buffett said this. He said, if you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you'll keep working until you die, which is basically true, okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
What if you have a business? Is that passive or active?
That's a great question. So a business is actually, it's quantified. on the EBTI scale, it's different sector. You can see it as active, but what you're doing is you're building a business so that you yourself now have something that becomes passive long term. Because eventually you're going to be overseeing that your income is going to grow. You are generating, you have workers, you're generating funds, you're generating revenue, etc. So eventually you are going to get to that place where you do have a lot of passive income that's quote unquote coming in. Tim, do you have anything to add on that, or? No. Okay. That's Tim. He's kind of co-hosting the class or the session with me. He's going to be doing the real estate session next week. All right, so let's talk a little bit about maximizing your revenue. And the blue boxes that I highlighted are the ones which we're going to go take a little deep dive into. You guys understand giving. You guys know how to spend, so I'm not going to touch on those. So let's look a little bit into debt. So good debt versus bad debt. You guys have heard this before, right? Good debt versus bad debt. Yes? No? Yeah. Okay. Good debt is borrowing money to purchase appreciating asset. Bad debt is basically borrowing money to purchase anything that's depreciating. If you think about things like buying shoes, buying a car, buying, I don't know, a purse, etc., all of those are classified as bad debt. Whereas good debt is you have a mortgage. You might be buying an art collection that you know is going to appreciate. You might be purchasing real estate investments. So all of those things now qualify as good debt. So one of the things that we're going to look at or talk a little bit about, because the first time which we ran the session, there were a lot of questions that came around, well, how do you pay off debt, right? And my thing, remember when I started, I said you always need to look at your interest, okay? With everything that you do, I will ask you, what's the interest rate? When you have bad debt, right, I always look at the interest of that bad debt to see how quickly I need to pay off that bad debt, okay? So take, for example, I bought let's say I bought a new TV from Best Buy, right? Whether I can afford it or not, we'll get to that one. I bought a TV from Best Buy. I got one of their introductory, rates where I don't have to pay any interest on it for 18 months, right? Because they do a lot of those deals, right? Do I need to pay that off quickly? No, because it's 0%. To me, it's free money, okay? I can take however much, let's say the TV costs $1,000. I can take $1,000. I can go park $1,000 in my savings account. That's getting me let's even say it's getting me 2%, right? And I can get 2%, even if it's just $20, I can get $20 on that $1,000 versus just going off and paying off Best Buy. Does that make sense? Because the interest rate is 0, so it's free money. So in the same way, whenever you guys are looking at debt, you need to pay attention to the interest rate. And if the amount of debt if the amount of debt you're going to have and the interest is higher than what you could do if you were to put that money to work in a different area, pay it off. Does that make sense? Okay, so always look at the potential of every dollar. Always. Okay? Yes?
How would you classify like student loans?
Necessary evil. Unnecessary evil. Yeah. So I wouldn't call school loans bad debt. They really are a necessary evil. You can even look at it as quote unquote good debt because that debt helps to provide education for you. That's going to help you to get a job, get money, blah blah blah. Okay. And
so how about if you're in a situation where you've accumulated debt and your job that you have now doesn't allow you the finances to pay off that debt in a reasonable time? Like assuming that you'll have that debt, you'll be paying that debt for the rest of your life. Like, how would you manage that? And like, how, I guess, is that still considered good debt? Like, you know, because I feel like if you do that, then you can end up paying maybe 3 times or maybe 2 times as much as the principal balance was. I don't know.
No, you will.
Yeah.
It depends on it. So it depended on the interest rate, and that's a problem with revolving credit or revolving debts like that. Let's say you have $50,000 on a credit card or across your credit cards, and you're paying 22% and making the minimum balance, right? By the time you pay that thing off, you're gonna pay probably like 4x the initial $50,000, right? And what you've got to do is look at how you're restructuring a lot of the income streams coming in to pay off that debt, right? There is a place for investing, there's a place for savings, and there's also a place for paying off debt. So in that instance, I wouldn't say, I'm not going to tell you don't invest, don't save, just pay off your debt, because the issue you're going to run into, or that person is going to run into, is that if you have an emergency, and let's say you need $1,000, and if you don't have what I'm going to get to is emergency savings, you're basically putting that $1,000 back on a credit card, right? Because you have no way to be able to pay that off. So these are 3, like debt, savings, and investing are 3 areas which you've always got to balance. It's a yo-yo. There's not one that's going to outbalance another, or you know, if in every situation, it's going to be dependent on each person's unique situation. That's why my goal in this class is to help to teach you guys how to think, and not necessarily to tell you what to do. Does that make sense? Okay.
Can I say something real quick about
Yeah.
student loans? So I think there's a point where student loans can be good debt, and there's a point where it could be bad debt. So when, in taking student loans, the amount you take, I think you should be able to see, what am I going to get out of this amount of money?
The ROI.
So, you know, if I'm going for a degree where I'm gonna get just enough to pay the minimum, then it's not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to take into account, what am I actually getting the student loan for? So in that instance, it's good debt because you're investing in the future, you're investing in a higher rate of return. Now, once you're done, you cannot pay the minimum, because then it becomes bad debt. The interest now becomes higher than how much you're actually saving. So it depends on when.
So I'm saying this, I guess, from a second, because I hear from some friends, they'll be like, well, I'm not going to pay it off, I'll just pay the minimum, and they can't do anything. Like, I'm wondering, can anything be done? Like,
So
will that mess up your credit, or I don't know?
So it wouldn't mess up your credit. So,
And this is the benefit of...
I had the option of paying off my student loans over 30 years, but we ended up paying it over 7 years.
Right.
And that's because however much you think you're saving from paying up that minimum, you're going to end up losing with the interest. So then you compare, it's best for me to suffer now and have no interest on this high interest student loan, and then you can enjoy later and put the money to other things. So some people do want to pay the minimum depending on what their spread is. So if they have a lot of things they have to spend money on, hopefully wisely, then maybe that's all they can afford. But as much as you can, minimize, don't act like you're now done with school.
Yeah.
Actually still live like I'm in school, so you can pay off that student loan over a short period and you don't have that interest capitalizing.
Sorry, by the way, she's a medical doctor, you know, just like you, so the both of you.
You were gonna say something?
Yeah, I just want to add 2 things to the subject of debt. I think the first thing when we think about debt is to remember that discipline is a factor.
Yes.
So that's number 1 I just want to put out there. Number 2 is that I know we talk about a good debt or bad debt, right? Before you qualify, debt in itself is not a good thing, right? In itself. Before you qualify, because once you have the mindset, so it's not, because if you're not responsible enough to get it, right? And then you go take it, especially in a culture that we live, like people just offer you $0. Like Loretta gave an example of buying a TV. Now, the first place before you even think about getting into that kind of debt, can you afford it? Do you need it? All those kind of questions might be able to help you to decide, do I want to take this debt? Now, when you not take the debt, it now becomes, is this a good debt or a bad debt? So I just wanted to put that out there for us to also think about debt in itself, because it means that you are you are taking someone's, you are getting access into something that you did not earn.
It depends. So here's what I would say about that is that for me, I think it depends, right? So if you think about something like purchasing a house, you have to go, unless you have $400,000 or $500,000, cash, you tend to have to take a loan to be able to purchase a house. The other thing is that even if you do have the $400,000, I would not advise anybody to go take the cash, to put the cash down and to purchase a house outright. Why? Because money is cheap, right? At this point in time. There was a time when the interest rate on mortgage loans were around 9%. Money was not cheap then. But the average interest rate right now is less than 4%, and it's like 3.625. So money is pretty cheap. So there's a lot, and remember what I said is that you've got to think about the potential of every dollar. If I can take the $400,000 and I can use the $400,000 and get 10%, I can do that and still service a 3.65%, and then my effective is 10% minus 3.625. Does that make sense? So you always got to have the mindset that you're thinking about what or the potential for each dollar. Now, but you bring up a good point about can you afford it? So I'm going to tell you guys a hard-learned lesson that I had, right? So I graduated from college. I told you guys I was an electrical engineer. I was excited. I suffered for 4 years. When I graduated, I was like, yes, I'm done. And, got a good paying job. I was working in the semiconductor industry, and I, for the first year I worked, and then, because it was in sales, so we were basically doing like sales training, and then we're deployed out to different regions, and I needed to get a car. So I thought to myself, I have worked really hard. I want to buy myself a very nice car. So I went out and I bought myself an Acura TL. I think I had $5,000 in the bank, like literally $5,000 in the bank, and I went and bought an Acura TL. And I put $3,000 down, so it means I had net $2,000 left, right? And could I pay for the car? Yes, because it was my monthly payments, I believe, was $614 or $617, I can't remember. It was a little over $600 every single month. So as my paycheck was coming in, could I pay for the car? Meaning, could I pay for the $614? Yes, I could pay for it. Could I afford the car? No, I could not afford that car. And you think about it, why? Because I had $2,000 in the bank, and I want to go get an Acura TL. It makes zero sense, okay? And one of the things that I have come to realize is that just because you can pay for something does not mean that you can afford it. Because there are a lot of different ways that you can pay for something, but saying I can actually afford it is something different.
But what's the tipping point? Because for some people, they still think they can afford it.
That's great. So here is my test. my affordability test, okay? If you don't have enough cash in your bank account to pay for that asset and still have 3 to 6 months of emergency savings, and we'll talk about what 3 to 6 months of emergency savings looks like, you can't afford it, okay? I'm gonna say it again because I know I'm injuring some people. Dad, I don't know what I just did. I just did something. Yeah. So you need to be able to buy a depreciating asset. This includes cars, okay? And I know a lot of people don't think about cars whenever they think about this profile because it's like, well, cars are very expensive. Who's gonna have $30,000 in the bank to go pay for a car? Well, hopefully this makes you think twice about buying the car because once you buy the car and you drive it off the lot, the car becomes a losing asset. The car is no longer worth $30,000, okay? So you need to have the cash, okay? Take that amount of cash, multiply it by whatever you want to buy. Let's say I want to go buy a $2,000 purse or, I don't know, Michael Kors shoes or I don't know, whatever it is. If you take that and you subtract it, you need to have 3 to 6 months of emergency savings left. If you do that, you can afford that asset. If you don't have that, you cannot afford that asset. That's my definition of affordability.
But isn't there a danger in this? Danger in this is if I get to a point where, I guess you still have to think, because you still have to think of it from the opportunity cost of money, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Because you can always assume the mindset, okay, I've got 3 to 6 months emergency fund. It means point forward, I can spend every single dime I have because I can pretty much afford everything, right? Net gain 0, but then the opportunity cost of using that
Absolutely.
money is what you're losing in spending money and depreciating that.
Absolutely, right? So that's why you've got to think, to me,
You
right?
can't buy that Ferrari anymore.
You can't buy them. Tell you what. So here's the thing, right? You're absolutely right about the opportunity cost of every dollar, right? And that's why I said at the beginning, you need to operate like I'm a business. The goal of my business, and remember I asked you guys at the beginning, what is wealth to you? Everybody has their own definition of wealth. If I'm trying to get to $1 million and I'm spending money willy-nilly, how am I going to get to $1 million, right? And that's why you need to think about what is the value of every single dollar? What can I do with every single dollar that comes in to make the most impact on my business? Make sense? All right. All right, so tip number 1, don't buy depreciating assets on credit, okay? And I'll have these tips like as we go through the presentation or as we go through the presentations, okay? So I said don't buy depreciating assets on credit, but I put some exceptions, right? Unless you have enough cash to cover the expense and you have a credit loan that's less than 3%, okay? I'm gonna give you guys this example, right? Somebody close to me recently purchased a car. They were going to put all the money down to pay for the car. And I said, no, don't do that. Why? Because the place they purchased the car from had a great, they had a great financing special where they were actually going to finance a car for 1.9%. In that scenario, if somebody is going to give me money at 1.9%, does it make sense to give them a lot of money to purchase that asset? No, because that money is cheap. Does that make sense? So whenever I use the term money is cheap, I want you guys to think when I say money is cheap, it means that the cost of using that money is cheap. Does that make sense? Everybody following me so far? All right, fantastic. All right, go to the next one. I love cars. See me and you, I love cars, right? So same mistake, a different perspective. So after I had my Acura TL, paid it off, right? I did pay it off. I never missed a payment, right? I paid it off, and I think I had it for about a year, was driving it around, and I think I got to about 100, I want to say it's 120,000 miles on it. And I started to think to myself, oh my God, my car has so many miles now, I need to trade it in. Like I need something that's newer while there's still value in this car, etc. So I basically convinced myself that I needed a new car. So I went out and I bought a new car. But my key thing, right, because the mistake that a lot of mistakes I made with the TL, but one of the critical ones that I found out was that paying $617 for a depreciating asset was ridiculous. So I made it my point that with my new car that I was going to get it under $400 per month. So I got I got the cost of it down, and it was I think like $390 something, I can't remember. So it was $390 something, was paying it off. Then as I learn more about finances, I'm like, okay, Loretta, we need to stop this buying of cars because it's not helping me or it's not helping you. I actually was going to do a modeling of how much opportunity costs I've lost with all the cars that I've bought. And I was like, nah, I don't want to do it to myself because I don't want to cry. Because literally you would cry because it's a lot. I literally have spent, I've spent over $70,000 on cars. I'm just being transparent, right? And that is $70,000 that I did not have sitting in a bank anywhere. So I've not only lost that money, I've lost the potential of what that money could have done for me long term, okay? So, but the one thing that I wanted to point out here is as I got to the end of the loan term of this car, I got to a point where I'm like, you know what? I have money sitting in the bank. Maybe I should just go ahead and pay off the car, right? There were two things that stopped me from doing that. One was the amortization schedule, because I only had about a year left on the loan. If you guys ever look at a loan schedule, the majority of interest that you pay on any item is on the front of the loan, not on the back of the loan, okay? So if you are trying to pay down a principal, it's better for you to add more money on the front than on the back, because if it's on the back of the loan, you're mostly just, you're paying principal at that point, okay? So for me, that was one thing that I thought. I was like, well, what's the point? I already paid the majority of the interest on the car. And the other thing that I did right was that the interest rate on that was actually 2.9. So it was cheap. It was cheap money, right? Should I have taken the loan? No, but the loan was cheap. It was technically cheap. So I decided that I was not going to pay it off quickly. Instead, I took the money that I would have used to pay it off, and I invested that money, okay? And that's basically what I did with the money. Car's paid off. People keep asking me when you're going to buy a next car. I tell them when this one dies. Seriously. I'm serious. All right, so we've talked a little bit about investing, but there is a place for savings. I want to make sure that you guys understand that. I'm not telling you take all the money that you have today in savings or whatever and go invest that money. That would be very, very not smart. So there is a place for savings, and if you look at the primary reason for savings is so that you have cash available on short notice and on short term and on minimal notice, okay? Give you guys an example. My beautiful car, which I love right now. I got in the car on Monday, like literally last week, try to turn on the car. Car would not start. Battery was dead. I had a call. They came to jump my car, and I took the car to the mechanic. The mechanic said it was going to be $255 for me to change the battery. If I had taken the car to the dealership, it would have cost $409. So I did save money there, right? But $255, right? Savings is to be able to cover these emergencies. If my car breaks down on the side of the road and I need to get it towed, if I have a medical emergency, that is the purpose of savings. And that's why, or let's even look at it, if you get laid off from your job, right? You need to have savings to be able to cover these life's emergencies. So, financial tip number 2. You need to have 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses at all times. I highlight the word at all times. That is a savings must. All times. The other thing that you guys have got to be cognizant of, right? So I say 3 to 6 months. If you are single, living at home, don't really have a lot of, expenses. Mama still helps you guys, pay the bills, etc. I used to do that. I miss those days. Now I got a mortgage. So if you have that, you probably only need about 3 months. You don't need a full 6 months, because if any kind of emergency happens, you're living at home. You don't have a lot of expenses. If you have a family that is dependent on your income, I recommend that you have 3 to 6 months. If you have a dual income family, and let's say that the way you guys have structured your expenses is to be able to live off of one income, you could probably get away with 3 months. If you have dual or just single income and the majority of your family is dependent on only your income, or if the family is dependent on both incomes, you need to have 6 months. If you've got children, you need to have 6 months. I probably even recommend you have 9 months, okay? So this is just some things that you guys need to be thinking about as you structure your finances, okay? Everybody following? Questions? No? Clear?
And everything else goes into investments?
Yeah, we'll get there. It depends. So before you invest, you need to look at your time horizon. If you need the money, let's say I already have my 3 to 6 months emergency fund saved. But let's say I'm planning on making a big purchase in the next 2 years. Big purchase meaning I'm saving up for a house, right? Don't put that money in investing. Don't put that. And what I always tell people is that there are 2 ways of investing. You invest through your retirement account, right? That to me that will get there, and that's a must. invest through your retirement account. If you have personal account or personal investment goals, only invest personal money that you don't need within the next 3 to 5 years. If you need that money within 3 years, don't invest it. Okay? All right. So let's talk a little bit about savings accounts. Here I'm going to give you guys just a little history lesson. Not really a lesson. Most of you guys probably already know this. So in October of 1929, that was basically the start of the Great Depression. So basically what happened was that a lot of banks started to fail left and right. And here you see, this is actually a soup kitchen that you see. But what happened was that as the stock market was crashing, because the stock market ended up crashing, I think about like 90% over the course of 10 years or something like that. So as the stock market was crashing, people were trying to pull their money out of different assets. So a lot of people went to banks to be like, hey, all right, I have 500 in this bank. I want my money back. But guess what? The banks didn't have their money because I don't know if you guys know this, but banks don't keep your money in the bank. Banks use your money to invest so that they actually can get more money, okay? That's how a bank is structured, right? So when people went to try to get their money back, they were not able to. And banks started to fail left and right. People started to lose, people lost a lot on their investments. People lost a lot also on their savings. And what happened is that a lot of people lost confidence in the banks. So to reinstill the confidence in banks, FDR actually set up the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, okay? Every certified bank that or savings account has an FDIC bank backing up to $250,000. Meaning that up to $250,000, the United States government will guarantee that that money is always available to you, okay? And the reason why I say that is that you need to think about your emergency savings, or let's say you have long-term savings goals, it needs to go to something that is insured, okay? And when you put it in a bank, you need to be cognizant of which one of these types of instruments you can put it into. There's traditional savings, there are money market accounts, there are online savings, and then there are also CDs, okay? I have I have two banks, right? I have two types of accounts. I have what I call my everyday account, and then I have what I call my offshore account. It's not really offshore. It's actually an online bank, okay? What you'll see is that with traditional savings and checking accounts, the interest rate, remember I go back to that word, the interest rate on that is like 0.01. It's so ridiculous. Don't put your emergency savings in there. They don't give you enough for you to have your money in there. Where you need to have your money is either in the money market accounts or an online savings account. And the difference between the money market account is that sometimes they will have a minimum balance or requirement. And until you meet that requirement, they might be charging you. So I tend to use an online savings account. There are many of them, okay? There is Ally, there are Goldman Sachs, there are lots of different online savings accounts. Your emergency savings, right, should go in an online savings or a money market account. You can also put it in CDs if you want to, right? My issue with CDs is that it locks up your money for a period of time. So if you have a 6-month CD, you can't pull your money out before that period or before 6 months. Otherwise, you get hit with a penalty, okay? So this is... I wanted to make sure to point this out in case anybody has their savings in a traditional savings account. My dad used to do this until he saw the light. Huh? Yes. So those of you guys that might have it, don't worry. The last class, there were a lot of people that left the class and went to go open up online savings accounts. So
Which one did you say you used?
I use Ally, but you can use, there are a lot of them. So you don't have to use Ally. All right, so A laddered strategy is something that you can employ if you have long-term savings goals, okay? A laddered strategy just basically says that you can actually put your money in CD ladders. So you can have a 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months, okay? Remember, I started from 6 months, but that does not mean that you don't have any emergency cash, right? And you need the emergency cash because if you pull that money before 6 months is over, they will charge you, okay? They will charge you an early withdrawal penalty. So you can, if you have long-term savings goal, maybe you're saving for a wedding. I mean, I don't know. I'm making up stuff at this point. I don't know what you'd be saving on long-term for. You can employ a laddered strategy to help to maximize on your guaranteed, savings. Because the longer you give them your money, let's say in 18 months, they will have higher interest rate for you than if you were just to give them your money for 6 months. Does that make sense? Okay. Everybody following me? All right, good. All right, so we've come to the point where we're going to take a short 10-minute break. So we have some food. For those of you guys who are eating, please go enjoy the food, and then we will reconvene here at about 10:23. All right? Yes.
But before we go, I just want to make this inquiry. When we were trying to look into options of investment, somebody gave us this names: Bessemer, Fidelity, Pan American.
So those are I think those are brokerage